This is the rotary cutter that I'm going to use with that Ford 5000. So I got this John Deere 6-foot bush hog. Whenever I bought my David Brown, the guy kind of included this with the tractor. I've never really used it. I've been using my Ford 8N with a 5-foot lamp rod. So I'm kind of anxious to see what this thing will do. This is quite a fair bit heavier, and that 8N wouldn't even touch this thing. You probably need a good 40 plus horse to run this bush hog. So I'm going to get this thing hooked up to that tractor. And one thing I got to do with this is the PTO lock is seized, and also the shaft itself doesn't slide in and out for the PTO. So that's got to be fixed. And also I got to take a peek inside the gearbox, because that fill plug right there has been broken for a while, and I'm sure that water's got in. But I'm anxious to see how this 5000 is going to do with this 6-footer. We'll get this thing hooked up. I've been weed whacking around that bush hog for far too long. It's been there about 1.5 years since I bought the David Brown. But anyway, look at this thing. This is an absolute unit. 6-footer. Almost makes the tractor look small. So the problem with this bush hog is that these clutch discs for the slipper clutch have been together for way too long. And they're quite rusted. The other problem is that this PTO shaft does not telescope anymore, so I'm gonna have to try to get that heated up enough to come undone. And this is all the rust that came out of the bottom where it's hollow. So this thing has had some water in it for quite a while, and now these parts are married together.
You don't care about the defrosters now.
I've been heating that for about 5 minutes. See if this comes loose. Alright, I'm going to try to give her a pretty good tongue. I'll try to go it's moving a little. Yeah.
Now you gotta put your elbow
It's moved a little, probably a couple inches.
to the backhoe and then put a chain on one end and chain it to your tractor and pull it right in back.
That would work.
It's like there's a stop.
Yeah, there probably is a stop, so it wouldn't make sense to... Well, that freed it up pretty good.
Yeah.
A little bit of heat. Wow. Well, sweet.
Now we should take grease.
Got the little catch for the PTO released. Just gotta wire brush that, clean it up a little bit, should be fine. Wow, how lucky can you get after being seized up for all those years? Well, save myself some money there if I can reuse it. Awesome. Finally got one of the grease fittings out. That was quite a job, and I'll show you how I did that. And there's 2 grease fittings on this PTO shaft. And that's what they look like, all rusted. So we've achieved a pretty high temperature now. I've got a funny feeling that this slipper clutch is going to prove to be a little bit of a nightmare. Well, I've got this wrench. This came with the bush hog. I guess this is supposed to come in here and release the tension on this clutch pack so that you can slip the clutch. And you're supposed to do that like once a year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crawl underneath, because obviously I can't pull that by hand. I'm going to try to give the blade a turn, see if this won't loosen up. Looks like there's a cotter pin and a nut on the end of this shaft. So I'm going to try to take this off. Maybe this whole clutch assembly will come off, because I can't get that nut loose. The big nut that you're supposed to adjust the slipper clutch with. Miracle that came out. Huh, that's finger tight. I guess in the manual that says that's not supposed to be super humming tight, but I'm sure there's a specification on how to tighten this. Because there's two pieces, I guess, inside of this clutch that are supposed to spin. One's supposed to pin. The other piece is supposed to be attached to the PTO shaft. So there's the castle nut. Well, looks like that whole thing comes off if it weren't for this bracket. Look, we're gonna need some heat. I ended up using about 180 pounds of air in that big 1-inch impact gun to get that nut off. I don't think this open-end wrench would have done much to helping me get this nut off. And I had to even use the torch to preheat the nut. So that being said, though, now we have access to what's inside, which doesn't look like much good. That thing, I don't know if there's any saving these clutches, let alone the steels. I might be replacing all the guts on the inside. Luckily though, I believe these parts are still available. So. Wow, look at that, guys. That's nuts. How rusted that thing is. It's like a sort of insect had a home in there at one point. Wow, look at that. Should be able to reuse that piece anyway. Man, that's bad. So these are the main components of that rotary cutter clutch. This main piece I was able to save. In this basket I was able to save. This is a part where the PTO actually hooks up to. And as you can see, I've got quite a bit of damage here where the clutch discs or the clutch plates would actually ride in this system. So what happened is, as this rotary cutter moves, as you can see, those steels would wear right in there. So I'm going to try to weld these up, beef them up a little bit, grind them down, and reuse it. Alright, that's a little better. Got all the welds ground down. That'll do alright. I'll get some paint on these things and start putting this clutch back together. So here's the clutch basket after I got it all painted up. And here's the drive that actually hooks up to the gearbox on the bush hog. I went ahead and I put anti-seize on all the parts that are going to be moving, and I ground it down best I could. Got some paint on it where it's going to need. I'm going to get putting this thing together. So I ended up having to get these 2 springs, an intermediate steel, 2 of those, 1 clutch pack with a steel, another clutch pack with a steel, and this thrust bearing, bushing, whatever you want to call it. My machine had these bonded clutch plates and steels, and I guess they are now superseded to the individuals. So this was a little bit of a mess calling the dealership and trying to get this figured out. So there's the bushing, the 2 steels, that's a clutch group, that's another clutch group, and here's the 2 springs that it calls for. Now here's the real shocker for that. Here's the invoice. Might be hard to see on the camera, but the whole bill for just those parts, $300 odd. I mean, it is what it is. John Deere kind of has their own little slipper clutch here, which is unique to themselves, so I really can't find universal aftermarket parts. I looked online, and even the online prices were expensive. So I went down to the dealership here not too far away and got hooked up with some parts. So it is what it is. That's what I need to get this thing working again. So sometimes you just gotta bite the big one and pay for it through the nose, I guess. But anyway, I'll show you how all these parts fit together. Going to clean the shipping oil off of these clutch plates, because that could potentially cause this whole thing to slip. They do ship these in oil just so that they don't rust up on you whenever they're in the boxes or bags, containers that they're shipped in. So at least you can say, for the amount of money that you're paying, at least they're well preserved. Well, I guess that tag's gonna live with that disc for a while, 'cause I'm not gonna mess with taking that off. So that's more or less what keeps the tension of that clutch pack together. You can see that thrust bushing in there. So there's 1 clutch pack, basically ready to put that back on the machine. This wrench is cool. This was actually included with the bush hog, and what this does is that fits on that nut perfectly, so whenever you're out in the field or whatever, you can actually slip this clutch if you need, or if it's slipping, you can tighten it up so it doesn't slip. Gonna try to straighten out this tail wheel. As you can see, it's kind of bent, and it doesn't allow the wheel to be adjusted up and down like it should. I think this thing is going to require quite a bit of heat and a pretty darn big pry bar, so we'll see if we can remedy this situation. Also, I gotta get a dust cap for that wheel bearing. Faster than I had. So that tail wheel is bent. I'm gonna have to try to straighten out the shaft and the press. And also, it was missing the dust cap for the wheel bearing. And also, it looks like this is dented. He must have hit something pretty hard to dent that. I mean, that thing, that's probably a solid 1.5 inch shaft. And that's some rugged steel. I don't know what was going on in this guy's head whenever he hit something, but it must have startled him, so. But anyway, let's see if we can get that fixed. I'd say that's been like that for a while. Might have to buy new wheel bearings for it. Yeah, that's one way to do it. Yeah, maybe I can reuse those. Alright, so we've got this tail wheel axle over here at my dad's place. I didn't have a press that would work to straighten this out. We're going to see if this will do the trick. See if a 20-ton jack will straighten that. If not, we'll have to do something different. We have to go a little bit by to get it past straight, so whenever it reflexes, it'll spring back.
If you went too far, you could always sneak it back the other way, right?
Just see what that looks like.
It did bend back, didn't it?
Yeah.
But just check it out. You hit and miss.
I mean, definitely a big improvement.
Had the probably 15 or 20 tons of force going down there.
Definitely is. But it's doing it. So whatever they hit, whenever they were mowing, that must have been quite a...
It must have jolted his teeth.
I'll bet he puckered a little bit. That's gonna straighten that out nice, I think, though. It's starting to bend just a little bit back the other way. So we're starting to get the thing pretty darn close to being straight again. I think just a little bit more, and we're gonna have it. You can kind of see from this angle, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this thing to go the opposite way of the bend. Because whenever I release the tension on this bottle jack, it's going to come back just a little bit. It's going to reflex. So watch what happens when I release the tension on this jack. See that? Probably a good ½ inch of movement there. But I think I went by enough. Well, I'll keep messing with it, but that's the idea. That's what's going to get this thing straight. Alright, so check that out. After about 15 minutes worth of messing around on the press, I got it pretty darn straight. I don't have a dial indicator set up for this thing, but this piece of 3/8 is about the straightest thing I can find in the garage right now. And look at that. I think that's just about perfect. So we'll call that a success. So check out this press. My dad built this to actually build and straighten hydraulic rams. And because of the table going this way through the press, I mean, you can basically straighten things as long as you need. The press at my house doesn't have that ability. So this thing is a pretty handy press for doing things like what we just did. So I thought I'd show that off. Took a little extra time and gave this tail wheel axle a nice fresh coat of John Deere green. I've also got this clamp that holds the tail wheel painted up nice. Oop, that was just stuck to the bottom. All right, so that turned out pretty darn nice. I kind of left this as a more or less a joke. Guard missing, do not operate. Because that plastic guard that's on these drive shafts, I mean, you might as well throw that thing in the dumpster. Those things are no good for anything, and they just make it really hard to grease the U-joints. I mean, I don't think it's any more or less safe with that guard on there. So I don't run them. But I think it's kind of a cool sticker, so I left it on there. Now you do have to make sure this drive shaft is oriented the proper way. What I mean by that is the flange here, the hard flange that doesn't pivot, has to line up with the hard flange on that side. So you can kind of accidentally clock this the wrong way, but you're gonna have all kinds of weird drive line vibration if you do. Now, the only thing I had to change was a shim on the outside. This is what the washer looks like. See how it's got the keyway cut into it? On the shaft itself here, it's kind of hard to see, but there is a shoulder. And if I were to just put this on, there would be a sizable gap in between this basket. And I think that basically the gap is created just because of the basket wear. But I'm not gonna replace the whole basket. I ordered an extra shim, bronze shim, so it shouldn't wear into the steel. I'm gonna put that thing back together just like that. Just like that. This clutch is kind of neat the way this works. Basically the PTO turns this outer basket that I'm shaking right here, and it comes in contact with these two clutch plates. So that's all that really drives the bush hog. So whenever these two pieces are chattering around, there's a shoulder in here, I think, that is wore down, and that's what's caused the need for a shim on the front now, which, you know, I think it's going to be fine. It's going to work all right, and it'll get me some more years of service. If you guys are doing this at home, just make sure that you do not over tighten this nut on the end of the clutch basket. There's a very strict procedure in the manual, and you do have to have a little bit of end play on that clutch basket. Let me show you what I mean. Here you can see there is end play. The manual says to tighten up this nut until there's 0 end play. And we'll just put a little bit of snugness. To seat everything. And the way I interpret it is, you more or less want to have, I would say, 0 lash on the clutch basket assembly. It's going to seem kind of loose, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but at the same time, this needs to spin freely so that this does not bind itself together. So you want this whole assembly to be able to slip. So if you back this nut off on the back here, it's going to slip itself. That's what you ultimately want. So there's a case or a situation where this whole basket is going to be spinning. So you don't want that bushing tight anyway. Once you get this thing where you want it, don't forget about your cotter pin. There you go. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, guys, but we are getting some serious rain outside. excited. There's actually fluid in there. Well, that's good news. And there's a dipstick that is broken. So we're going to try to get that all sorted out, I suppose. And I'm ecstatic that there's actually oil in there. Doesn't look super, but it's better than water. As you can see, I don't know if this is a vent or just a fill plug, but that's smashed and broken, but that's plastic. And this dipstick is also plastic. I'm having a hard time getting these pieces out. So I got this dipstick quoted down at the John Deere garage. That's $50. So I don't know if I'm going to spring for a new one of those or not, but I'm going to see what I can do with this cover, see what kind of solution I can come up with here. I got to have a vent on this cover somehow. I'll have to come up with something. I was pretty easily able to get this dipstick out. Basically just threads in there. It's kind of cheesy, but I think I can make that work. However, this plastic plug, I'm going to have to use an easy out, which is basically a metal tap, but it's got threads on it, and it's designed to be left-handed, so that as you turn it left-handed, it gets tighter into whatever you're trying to remove. We'll see if we can use that to get this plug out. That looks like NPT. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a breather from like a rear end vent. I'm going to put that in there. I think that'll do just fine. Get that nasty fluid out of there. So what I ended up doing for the vent here on this cover, I went and I got down at the parts store a differential vent, you know, for like a rear end of a truck or a car, kind of a universal type thing. And ended up just putting an adapter in there. So this is 1/4 inch NPT to 3/8. So that fits perfect. The way I look at it is, you know, you got gear oil in a differential, and it's doing its thing, and it has gears very similar to this bush hog gearbox. So I figured this should work just fine. You know, I don't think too much stuff is going to get in there, chaff and whatnot. I'm also going to reuse the dipstick. I just can't justify spending $50 for this thing down at the John Deere garage. That's just too much. So what I might end up doing is I might just use this to check the oil, and then I might just put a plug in here, and I'll just keep this on the tractor somewhere so I know where it is. The gear oil that I took out of this gearbox really wasn't that bad. I'm quite impressed actually that it didn't have a lot of water in it. I was kind of anticipating the worst, but I'm gonna put that in there, then put the cover on, see what the dipstick looks like. Wow, I couldn't have done that again if I tried. All right, we're all back in action. Have to give this thing a try pretty soon. I'm anxious to see what happens and how it goes. Hopefully there's no strange noises coming from this thing. I'm not sure what this guy hit to have bent that tail wheel and also to have bent this axle housing, but I'm sure he must have known it whenever he hit it. So I'm gonna have to heat that up and bend that back before I try pounding the race out of there. Alright, I got that pretty straight. The dust cap looks like it's going to go in there nice. And this is the race that I pulled out of there. Not the best looking race in the world. Definitely should have been replaced. And also this is the bigger of the two races I punched out of there. So we're gonna put in new ones. If anyone was interested, these are the part numbers for the races. A little grease in there just to help everything go together a little slicker. We're gonna take our race driver. There it is, all seated in. You can hear a difference whenever that race bottoms out. Went ahead and got this wheel all cleaned up, and it looks like the hub used to be green, the wheel was yellow. I don't really care that much to go and tape this thing off or take the hub out and paint that separate and then put it back together. So it's just going to get some yellow. Some of you John Deere guys out there right now are probably cringing, going, "Oh my goodness, that ain't John Deere yellow." Well, no guys, relax. This is safety yellow. This is Rust-Oleum's version of the John Deere yellow. So it's not very often that I paint anything yellow. So rather than run to the store and get the proper yellow, I figured I'm going to use this up. So this is going to be what's on the tail wheel. Again, we're going for runs per inch here, not any kind of nice smooth spray paint job. Just call me max coverage. Don't worry about those runs, guys. You can't see them from your house. Alright, well I think that turned out pretty darn nice. So what I'm going to do now is get the bearings all packed and ready to assemble this tail wheel. Alright guys, I'm going a bit old school. Haven't packed a wheel bearing in quite a little while. All right. Try to get as much grease as we can down inside the opening. Everyone adjusts wheel bearings just a little bit different. What I like to do is to take this nut and crank it right down until you really can't turn it anymore. Then spin that wheel just to make sure everything is seated. And I'm going to back that off. See how it's finger tight? And then I just kind of snug it up. Because once those bearings are seated and compressed all the way, they can't compress anymore. So when you back it off and then bring them up just to that point, that's pretty much perfect. And you've got very little end play, if any, which is just about what you want. I don't like to preload wheel bearings. I mean, sometimes you have to, because there's one notch and you pretty much have to either get in the notch for the cotter pin to go in, and sometimes the play of the nut is changed where that cotter pin is. Come on, tail wheel, let's go. I know, just taking my tail wheel for a walk. How nice that looks with that John Deere green. Oh! Huge air. right, so I think that's pretty darn close. The tail wheel is adjustable, obviously. And I'm going to try this, well, the tail wheel in this position first, just to see what happens. I got to get out in the field and really just start mowing with it and see if this is all right. Typically, you want to have the rear up a little bit so that the front kind of doesn't dig into the ground, but it cuts first. At least that's what they claim in the manuals, and I've had good luck running bush hogs that way. I'm going to try it, see what happens. So for the time being, I think that's going to be fun. I've got it clamped tight, and that should be pretty easily adjustable now that that's nice and straight, and that'll actually slide up and down, which is awesome. I think with a floor jack, it would adjust the easiest. Just put a floor jack underneath the bush hog itself and lift it up or down. Yeah, so I'm happy with that. Alright guys, so all I have left to do now is to test this bad boy out, and hopefully the gearbox doesn't make any noise. I really haven't tested it, so I've never used this bush hog since I've owned it, so this will be an interesting thing. Hopefully it all works out good. I have the chain for a top link, you know, just for now, that'll work, just to kind of move it around and use it, so we'll see how this thing goes. Looks like it's shuddering just a little bit, but the blades are rusted in one position. I think whenever the first time I hit some good grass, I think those will come right out of it. I'm pretty stoked though, it's not making any chatter or any noise in the gearbox. This is the only real heavy-duty stuff here that we have on the property, and it's not much, but this will be enough just to test this thing out and see what it will do. Wasn't even really a workout for that tractor, but at least I can see how the bush hog works. I think it's going to work pretty darn nice, so that wasn't even, like I said, that wasn't even really a workout, but that was just a trial. Well, I had a few cracks in the thing. I had to get welded up. Didn't really realize they were there until the very end. Check this out. This is 7018. How satisfying is that? Cool. Let's get some paint on this thing. Alright guys, so there it is, all painted up. It's all green now, and it's got some nice decals on it. So funny story, whenever I bought one of my tractors, it was a David Brown 1212, this 6-foot rotary cutter was included with that sale. The guy had big plans to get this thing all cleaned up and buffed up and looking good, but he never did. But he bought all the decals that you see here, these little reflectors. He bought all the paint and everything to get this thing back into action. I think that was an 02, so check this thing out. What a retro bag that is. So this is the paint. He had 4 cans of this, and I think 4 cans of this primer. It's pretty good stuff, it does the job, but I finally got it on there after a long wait. So this thing finally got the attention that it deserved. So I'm going to put it back to work. This video is getting really long, so I'm going to end it right here. But I will have some videos coming up in the future actually putting this thing to work, so check those out.